figure all of that out, I think one of the hardest parts is, how do I make sure that I'm standing out on social? What name is going to just make everyone want to come to my site to listen to what I have to say? And Kristen, I want to kick this off to you. Like, what was that decision making process in choosing out the name of your site, and then how to conduct yourself on social?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded question. I'm terrible at titles. Ask anybody that knows me. I'm great at talking about things, but if you ask me to name anything, like whether that's a dog or a website, I'm fairly terrible at it. So thank God I don't have children, because I'd probably try to change their name like 18 times because I hated what I picked. So in my case, creating a website, I picked something that kind of conveyed what it was about, which, at the time was classic film. And then when I started social media, which I really only had gotten into Twitter because I had the blog at the time. And so I was like, oh, well, people aren't going to connect me with the site, so I have to create a name for myself that is similar, which is how I have the Twitter handle at journeys_film that I have now. The problem is that once I started to become, a critic in my own right and started writing for publications and turned this into a job, people would ask me what my Twitter handle was, and I would have to tell them what it was, and they'd be like, why is it that? And I'd be like, well, I had a website and it was what I came up with. And so now, I'm in the process of trying to convince Twitter to change my handle to my name without me losing my verification status. Yes, I am concerned about my blue check status. So it's been a journey. So I would urge everybody to just kind of go with the boring name, that whether that's your name, just because eventually it's like a tattoo, you want to, if you're going to tattoo something onto your body, make sure it's something you can live with forever. And that's really kind of how I explain like Twitter and Instagram handles. Go with something that is going to be something that you can live with for as long as you're on those platforms.
And since we're on this topic of Twitter etiquette, social media etiquette, and how we came up with our names for our sites, I'm going to kick this to Robert, he loves his spicy tweets on social. So I'm going to kick this off to you.
Well, I agree with Kristen in terms of like the naming, especially with handles and stuff like that. Like, A12 Film Reviews. I thought I was being very coy with that. A little too coy. But in terms of, how you should handle yourself on social, it's funny. I like, as Sharonda says, my tweets are spicy, quote unquote. But, there are lines, right? Like, I tend not to use like expletives on Twitter. I just don't think, I just don't think it come off as very professional. And there also are larger publications that actually will sweep through your Twitter and be like, hey, you're using too many expletives. I know of one critic that happened to. And even having said that, though, it's a balance, right? Because you obviously want your own voice out there. You want who you are out there, right? But, so I tend to just go with the honesty is the best policy, just be yourself, because people can see through calculating actions, I think. I think people are drawn to a genuineness. And so for the most part, it's just really about just being yourself and letting that come through. Within reason, there are colleagues on Twitter, there are filmmakers and people you would probably be interviewing on Twitter. So be cognizant of that.
Sounds like Robert's looked at my Twitter a time or two. No, I mean, it's definitely, it's a good question, because I think that, we all got into this industry because we love movies. And I think a lot of people that the assumption is that, we get to watch and say whatever we want about movies. And so there's a generation, I think, that's coming up on social media that believes that in order to be a critic, it's just kind of saying whatever you want on Twitter and then getting the ratio, right? And getting the popularity that comes from that. And I think if they realized how controlled a lot of us are on Twitter and Instagram, would cause them to take a step back. You know, in my case, I always call my social media journey kind of like my cooler high school years, you know, because when I started in this industry, I was very much of the mind that I was going to say what I want to say and be the type of person that I couldn't be in real life. And that, you know, led to some great friendships and some great conversations. But now that, you know, this is my job and I do work for a corporate entity, I've kind of had to take a step back. You know, I've met people in real life who have said, "Oh my gosh, you know, you're Kristen. I love your Twitter. All your comments about Oscar Isaac are just hilarious." And, you know, I over the last like 2 years, I've really kind of like pared back anything that would be considered like a thirst tweet or something, because at this point, the reality of me interviewing some of the people that I've talked about is a very real concept. So I think that, you know, I always treat it as this is social media presence is just as much a job as the actual job that you are doing. And and our industry is a very small pool, right? Even though we're spread out all over the world, if you want to do this job professionally, there's a very real possibility that you might be interviewing with this site one day. You might be talking to this editor. And so if you're going on Twitter, starting a Twitter war with the editor of a publication, and then you turn around and say, "Oh, but I also want to write for you," you know, that causes problems. So there's a whole level, I think, of like added professionalism that has to go into a social media presence that is not really talked about.